So I thought this would be a really fun video. I saw a lot of my friends doing this at the beginning of the year, and originally I was going to do it, but then I just got sidetracked and I didn't do it. So I figured let's do it at the halfway mark rather than at the beginning mark. We are at the halfway point of 2025. We are at the halfway mark of the 2020s. So I thought it would be a good idea to go back and look at the first 25 years of the 2000s. There we go. Landed that plane properly. So yeah, we are talking about my favorite albums from each year, starting at the year 2000 and going all the way up to, I guess, 2024. So we're talking about 25 records. I thought this would be fun. Let's talk about my favorite records of each year from the 2000 to 2024. Now, there's a little bit of a caveat on this one, though. I'm going to be talking about my favorite record when I was in that year, and there are certain albums, there are certain things that I didn't hear until well after that year, because we are now 25 years away from some of those records, that I didn't hear until afterwards, so which then superseded those records. So for some of the records from like the 2000s, the early 2000s, I actually have two records. One that I loved in that year when I was listening to the music at that time, and then those records that I have come to love afterwards. So if I talk about two records in a single year, you'll know why. I am going to move myself a little bit over. I'm just going to scoot so that I have a proper area over here to showcase the record that I'm talking about. So I think that's enough kind of, build up. Some of these records you should know, especially starting at 2014, because starting at 2014, that's when I started this little YouTube thing. So you will know those if you've watched my year-end lists. Those records really haven't changed. Those are still my favorite records of those years. But yeah, let's talk about it. Let's start all the way back 25 years ago, year 2020. I was just graduating middle school and elementary school, going into high school at that point. So my favorite record of that time was Kid A by Radiohead. Oh man, I remember listening to that record and just being blown away by what I was listening to. The experimentation, the odd sounds that shouldn't have sounded good, but ended up being so infectious and so beautiful. To this day, still one of my favorite records. But there was another album that came out along that same time that I didn't hear until about 10 years later, which was Beethoven's Last Night by the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Most people know about Trans-Siberian Orchestra through their 3 Christmas records, but they also have 3 non-Christmas records, and Beethoven's Last Night, it takes a lot of Beethoven's themes and put it into a rock connotation. So, I ended up loving Beethoven's Last Night a little bit more than Kid A, even though I would probably say that Kid A is more of a favorite record of mine. I'm weird that way. Moving on to 2001, we have another double hitter. First up, 2001, first year proper of high school, Lateralis by Tool. Man, I loved Lateralis by Tool. I listened to that sucker on repeat, just being washed over. Like, this was priming of the pump for me to eventually get into progressive rock proper with Selling England by the Pound, Fragile, In the Core of the Crimson King, Thick as a Brick, because of the things that were being basically shown to me by Lateralis. It's so complex and it still holds up. Even today, 24 years later, it still holds up. But there was another album that came out in 2001 that I actually enjoy a little bit better, and that is Bridge Across Forever by Transatlantic. Damn, this was, in one case, the pinnacle of progressive rock. Talk about distilling what I love about progressive rock and putting it on a single record in all shapes and forms. The supergroup that, to this day, has only done a little bit of a blemish every once in a while. At this point, they could do no wrong, and I still think this is their best and most solid record. The 2 epics, the 3 tracks that are in the middle of this record, the whole thing is a masterpiece, and to this day, it is always what I hold up against whenever I'm talking about a masterpiece. So, love that record. Absolutely amazing. Let's move on to 2002. I do want to be a little bit quick on this, so if you feel like I'm going quickly about these albums, it's because I am. But we've got 25 records to talk about, and in some cases even more because I'm doubling them up. And this is another double up. 2002. Let's talk about Yankee UXO by Godspeed You Black Emperor. Yeah, I remember, again, halfway through high school at this point, and I was looking for anything experimental, anything crazy. Bunch of Canadians from Montreal playing just the most challenging experimental noise rock. Even, like, I would go ahead and say that Yankee's probably my favorite, maybe my second favorite record from them. Yeah, if you talk about experimentation, build-ups, and payoffs, this is what I love about progressive rock. And I mean, Godspeed is one of the masters of a build-up and a payoff. And this album in particular, the 3 tracks that are found on it, build up and pay off incredibly well. But another album came out that year that I didn't hear for a couple of years, which was Unfold the Future by the Flower Kings. Another example of a prog masterpiece. Even though this is 2 discs of full music, both discs being around 80 minutes worth of music, it's still incredible. Like, you have the book-ending epics, but even the mini epics that are found within, just outstanding. This is, again, what I hold up other masterpieces to when you're dealing with this amount of music. It is punchy. It is amazing. And absolutely love it. I cannot praise Unfold the Future more. And we are going to go to 2003. So 2003 was the introduction for me to proper post-rock. Some would say that Godspeed You Black Emperor is a post-rock. I qualify them more in the experimental rock, but this was my real love of post-rock with The Earth Is Not a Cold Dead Place by Explosions in the Sky. Man, I remember when this first came out and I was just blown away. I didn't think that a masterpiece could be both this quiet but also this bombastic. Like, this style of music was unheard of for me before. All of it was so atmospheric, so ethereal, but at the same time, it could be so aggressive and so bombastic. And yeah, The Earth Is Not a Cold Dead Place showed that you could create a masterpiece by doing this style of music. But, like I said, we have another one that I didn't discover until a few years later. This one was a quick discovery for me, and that was Absolution by Muse. Still probably my favorite record from Muse. I mean, it's always between this one and The Origins of Symmetry, but I think this one takes the cake, showcasing the rock style is not dead, because back in 2003, rock was in a really weird state. You had nu metal, you had the beginning styles of emo and, the next wave of whatever metal and rock would do. In some ways, metal or rock was kind of dead at that point, but Absolution from Muse proved that no, it is still very much alive and well, especially over in the UK, and it really changed the dynamics of things. All right, 2004, we're going over into Dark Matter from IQ. Still my favorite IQ record. Still absolutely love that one. This one really showcased to me, because at this point I was really into progressive rock. I didn't think they were doing too much new music. So this was when I discovered, the Flower Kings. This is when I discovered The Tangent, which I'll get to in a little bit. This is when I discovered all these other albums that I thoroughly loved. And Dark Matter, I remember dropping, and I'm like, this is a brand new record. And it sounds like the stuff that I love from the 70s and 80s, because up until that point, I was listening to like Marillion, like the first 4 records from Marillion, and I thought that period of progressive rock was done. And then Dark Matter drops on my lap, and I'm like, oh, it is still very much alive and well. I still love the epic, the Harvest of Souls, one of my favorite songs of all time. But also some of the smaller tracks on the first side of this record is still so brilliant. But then there's also another record that came out that I discovered a few years later on, The Human Equation by Ayreon. Man, what can I talk about within this album that hasn't already been said? I do think that this is Ayreon's best work. The crystal clear concept, the bringing in of different people to take on all the different emotions and all the different characters. Absolutely brilliant. It doesn't have a bad track on it. I mean, a lot of Ayreon albums are like that. I think that this really started the trilogy, started with this, went on to 0-1, and then finished off with the Theory of Everything. Those 3 records, I think, are perfect. The albums that came before had perfect moments, but I couldn't say from start to finish they were perfect, right? So this one started that trilogy, and I still think it's the best. If you haven't heard it, you have to listen to it. Okay, I think this is the second last of the double ups. 2005, we got Ariel by Kate Bush. This album was another one of those albums that really changed my life. You know, I fell in love with Kate Bush's music. After devouring this album, I went back and I listened to her whole discography and just fell in love with all of her music. I mean, I got one back here for a reason. And to this day, Ariel is still one of my favorites. I think that has been superseded by Never Forever. But like the vibe, the groove, and it showcased me once again that an album didn't have to be this symphonic, big, grandiose statement. It could be a very intimate statement and still be a masterpiece. And man, the amount of times I've listened to Ariel, it might be one of my most played records of all time. But another album that I listened to probably 3 or 4 years later, Francis the Mute by Mars Volta, challenged me in a way that very few records did, and it became one of my all-time favorite records. Like the build-ups, the payoffs, the chaos, the revolution of it all. I still get so much joy from listening to this record that it's hard to ignore. So I couldn't talk about albums that came out in 2005 without saying Francis the Mute is one of the best records of that year, if not the best record. Still kind of goes hand in hand of which one I like more between Francis the Mute and Ariel by Kate Bush. When I was in 2005, 100% it was Kate Bush. Because I think if I was listening to Francis the Mute in 2005, I think it would be a little too much for me at that point, and I probably would give it to Kate Bush. But now that the dust has settled, I think they're kind of neck and neck. You know, I do think that they're kind of neck and neck. Okay, let's go into 2006. We've got A Place in the Queue by The Tangent. Love this record. I think this is the best Tangent record. We have the 2 epics opening and closing. This is the perfect double album, you know, and it's structured in a way that creates a double album listening. You have the first side being a full song, you have the last side being a full song, and then you have each of side 2 and 3 having mini epics and little tiny bite size just to keep you sedated. Love this one. You know, the concept is brilliant. This is Andy Tillison's masterpiece. This is why I will point to this record, and whenever he puts out a new record that I don't connect with, I'm like, I know he has it in him to create a masterpiece. So I wish, oh, how I wish that we can get the masterpieces like this one again. But yeah, great record. So at this point, we come to 2007, and I was fully indoctrinated into progressive rock. You know, I didn't think there was going to be too many more albums out there that would shake the foundation of my musical enjoyment. But then this album hit me, and it hit me so hard. This was Fido's record, Doomsday Afternoon. Talk about a record that just swept me off my feet. This is still one of my favorite albums of all time. I very regularly say that this is my second favorite record right after Selling England by the Pound, just with how realized, how intense, how powerful this record can be. And it's just so different than anything else that I heard within the progressive rock landscape. You know, trying to pin down a subgenre into this without just saying that it's prog rock is incredibly different. The only thing that kind of comes to mind is eclectic or crossover prog. But even those 2 nomenclatures, they kind of do it a disservice, and it doesn't justify what's really found within it. So yeah, Doomsday Afternoon by Fido, absolutely brilliant. And then another one that I didn't think could get any better, we got Bloom Judd by Moon Safari. This really showcased my love of symphonic retro prog. This is the best symphonic retro prog that really has been ever put out. Just with that first record, you know, because it's a double disc, having, you know, Methuselah's Children, Moonwalk, Ghosts of Flowers Past. Just, it's so friggin' good. And then the other half of the sky taking up the bulk of the second CD being the 30-minute epic. You know, like, it's perfect. You know, there's no other way to say it. It's just perfect. And yeah, that's why it very easily gets the 2008. So now we come to 2009, and 2009 is the last double up. At this point, I fully knew Transatlantic. I fully knew all the bands. So when Transatlantic dropped The Whirlwind, easily my favorite record of that year. You know, single track, over 80 minutes worth of music, and it was just, you know, I feel like a lot of bands that try this one track album have a lot of dead space in it, but The Whirlwind is one of those few ones that, like, all banger, no filler, you know, and I absolutely could not love this album more. But there was another album that came out in 2009 that I didn't listen to for a couple other years, and that is ADHD by Riverside. This is what made me fall in love with Riverside. I think that this is Riverside's best work. It's so punchy. It's so immediate. They're blending progressive rock with progressive metal into this brand new entity. And I think it is their magnum opus. You know, what could they do after the whole trilogy record that they put out before? They made the best succinct, quick statement that they possibly could. And I absolutely loved it. So yeah, ADHD. Let's talk about, these are all single albums. We don't have any more double ups because at this point I was fully indoctrinated into progressive rock. I was doing my absolute best at, you know, keeping my finger on the pulse. And 2010 goes to Aquarius by Haken. Still, maybe the best Haken album that they ever put out. I absolutely love it. I come back to it time and time again. Celestial Elixir makes me cry every single time I listen to it. It really did usher in the third wave of progressive metal. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, stay tuned on the channel. I've got the history of prog coming up where I talk about all the different waves of the different facets of prog rock. So really excited to talk about that. But yeah, Aquarius by Haken absolutely blew me away. You know, this made me so excited for new progressive metal. Because at that point in 2010, progressive metal was starting to stagnate a little bit, if I'm not being, you know, if I'm being honest with myself. Because Dream Theater at that point was starting to stagnate. Opeth was starting to stagnate. I was waiting for more. And Haken definitely delivered that. Going into 2011, we've got Snowtorch by Fido. If I didn't think Doomsday Afternoon could be topped, Snowtorch told me that yes, in fact it can. Just the 2 tracks on it, 2.5, that really is just the Snowtorch suite, another album that in some ways is a single track, in other ways it's kind of divided. I like to approach it as just a single track. Man, Fido, this is like Fido's magnum opus for progressive rock. But then it would be Showed Up by Infernal. Absolutely love this record. This one very easily got the 2011 pick. 2012 got The Death-Defying Unicorn by Motorpsycho. Motorpsycho, this was my first record from them, and it just blew me away. I absolutely love the experimentation. I love the grittiness that was found on it. I love the meaty. I love the build-ups, the payoffs, the really, like, what on earth is even going on in the storyline at this point. Man, if you haven't heard of The Death-Defying Unicorn at this point, it's challenging, it's rewarding, and even to this day, you know, I still get a lot out of it. So, yeah, absolutely love that one. Let's go to 2013, and could it be anything else? Could it be anything else other than The Raven That Refused to Sing by Steven Wilson? I still think that this is one of progressive rock's best records. I would put it in the top 10 of best progressive rock albums of all time. I don't know why Steven Wilson refuses to write music like this anymore, because he just did such a good job of distilling what it was that I loved about progressive rock. Yeah, absolute masterpiece. This is one of the very few masterpieces that Steven Wilson has done, because every time I think he's about to do it, he kind of swerves, you know, he puts a blemish, he puts a boil on it that I'm like, we got so close. So yeah, Raven That Refused to Sing got 2013. Now we're into the 2014. So some of these you should know because I've talked about them in my past album roundups and my best of the year. Starting us off, the year that I started my whole channel was Perfect Beings, the debut self-titled work. Yeah, 2014 was a weird year for progressive rock. There were some great records that came out that year. There were some real disappointments from that year. But the one that surprised me the most was the self-titled Perfect Beings record. I still listen to it, and I still, like, there's no other record that's so like this. You know, it's poppy, but in progressive rock. It's proggy, but in a pop expression. And it really does blend the pop mentalities with progressive rock. And I really wish Perfect Beings would put out another album. You know, the 3 albums that we got from them was devastatingly not enough. So yeah, each record from them was a banger, but I still think that Perfect Beings' self-titled debut is their best because of how punchy it is, how succinct it is, and how perfect it is. So yeah. Going into 2015, we're going to Beardfish with quite possibly their best record of plus 4626 minus Comfort Zone. Yeah, what a statement. What an absolute statement. Up until that point, they ended on a high note. Songs for Beating Hearts was fine from last year, but it didn't capture that essence of creativity like this album did. You know, it was punchy, it was immediate, it had these brilliant movements within it that just moved me beyond words. Absolutely love this one, and I return to it quite regularly. All right, 2016, we saw Desire's Magic Theater by Person. I love everything that Person did, and I love everything that Rosalie Cunningham is doing currently. I still think this is her best album, though. It's immediate. It's the perfect blending of prog, rock, acid rock, psychedelic rock. This feels straight out of that movement that started in like 1965, that continued all the way to about 1975, of that really psychedelic rock. And it just distilled what I loved about it perfectly on this record. And there have been countless imitators, but I don't think we've got anybody that is doing it quite as well as Rosaline is doing. So yeah, absolutely love this one. Let's move to 2017 with Return to Omadon by Mike Oldfield. Mike Oldfield, we should all know who he is by now. Writer of Tubular Bells, the rewriter of Tubular Bells, the remastering of Tubular Bells. I feel like half of his albums are just Tubular Bells, but it's this album, Return to Omadon, that I think is his best work. Even though Omadon, like the original one back in the 70s, I would say up until that point, was the masterpiece, was his crowning jewel. He took everything that was great about that record and then expanded upon it. And he took everything that I didn't quite connect with on the original and did away with it. You know, this is the perfect distillation of the Omadon suite. I know he kind of flirted with it a little bit with Amarok, but this is the distillation, the perfect essence of Mike Oldfield's music. And I mean, it's his last record. He was going to do Tubular Bells 4, but it never got off the ground. So ending off his career with his masterpiece is the perfect way to go. And I return to this one very, very regularly. So yeah, absolutely loved it. And another album that is in a very similar vein to that, we have 2018's 5 Pieces for an Orchestra by Tony Banks. Like, I love Tony Banks. He's one of my favorite composers, period. But what he's doing with 5 Pieces is outstanding, and I wish more people would do this. It is a full-on classical album that is breathtakingly beautiful. He is distilling, much like Mike Oldfield, he is distilling his career into this perfect iteration of music. I cannot love this album more because it's perfect. It's a perfect record. You know, each movement on this record has a moment of genius on it. You know, this is where the spirit of masterpiece was visiting. And yeah, it took all of the moments that I loved with Tony Banks within his solo career, as well as his work with Genesis, distilled it down into the perfect essence, and then expanded upon it on this record. I think that this is his magnum opus, and if you haven't listened to it, honestly, you need to do yourself a favor and give it a spin, because it's a perfect record. All right, coming into 2019, we've got Terraformer by Thank You Scientist. Man, 2019 was such a great year for music, and trying to pick the best one was like pulling teeth, but at the end of the day, this was the album that I listened to the most. It's dense, it's long, it's a beast, but the amount of great music that's on here. Every time I think I have a favorite track, the next track comes along and kind of wins out. You know, this is one of those very few perfect albums, which is really saying something considering the length of it. And again, the track lengths, like each track on here could be the best track on any other album, but here it's just a drop in the bucket of a perfect album. So if you love that experimental, very jazzy, very modern progressive rock music, this is my favorite record from them, hands down. All right, we come to 2020, and 2020 was a year. It sure was a year. So the crowning jewel, the number one record for 2020 for me was Flower Tortoria, Torania. Flower Torania. Finally got it. By Zio. The first album, their second album was not great, but this album was the album that I listened to the most that year, and this was the one that got me through the year that was 2020. Like, holy geez, what a year. But this was the one that really saw me through that entire year. This was the one that I kept coming back to. I have such crystal clear memories of the things that I loved about that year, because there were a few things in that year that I absolutely love and I hold so dear to my heart. And this album captured that moment. So this is more of a personal pick rather than, what's actually found on here. But also, this was also just the album that I listened to the most. So, yeah. 2021, we come to Ekamen Enka. I always trip over that one. By Dune. This was a challenging one. This one is very similar to the Thank You Scientist Terraformer, where it's dense, it's meaty, and it took a number of listens to really get into this one. But once it clicked, man, it clicked hard. It's aggressive. It's the style of progressive metal music that I absolutely love. And much like Terraformer, every time I think I have a favorite track off of this album, I'm surprised because there's a better track following it. I absolutely love this one. This is Dune's best record. And yeah, going on to 2022, we're getting into very familiar territory. This was only like 3 years ago. I have little to no memories of these memories by Toe Hider. Yeah, perfect record. It's another single track piece. Toe Hider just pumps out music time and time again. Like, Michael Mills just does not sit still. But this one showcases what I love about progressive rock: the ebbs, the flows, the buildups, the payoffs. And the final conclusion of this record is just so brilliant that I can't help but just like high five all the angels as we're going through it. So, yeah. 2023, we have Jiminy by Bear Ghost, still in heavy rotation for me. I still listen to this one quite regularly. It's punchy, it's meaty, it's immediate, and it's just fun. At the end of the day, it is just a fun record to listen to, and I just cannot, I still listen to it very, very regularly, because when I need a fun lift me up, when I need just a very powerful oomph, I go to this record, and man, it is a great time. Yeah. Jiminy by Bear Ghost, which brings us to the most recent one, 2024. Boy, what a roundup we've had. Prelude to Ecstasy by The Last Dinner Party. This was the album that opened up the floodgates for me in pop music. I saw myself so crystallized in this record that anything else just wouldn't capture that same feeling. This proved to me that pop music can be brilliant. It could be a masterpiece. And that's why 2024 for me was the year of pop. So these girls know what they're doing. I can't wait to hear what else they have in store. And yeah, no other album from 2024 I listened to quite as much. Like, this one held the most listened to music, bar none. So that's it. That brings us to 2025. And I'm so excited to see what will take the crowning jewel for 2025, being my favorite record. We'll see what that is. We've got 6 more months to get through. There are some front runners. There's a few that are got that eye on the prize. But we'll see if they get dethroned as we enter in the second half of the year. So that's about it from me. What about you guys? What were your favorite records from this current millennia? Which were those albums that really stood out for you? What were those albums that you discovered later on that then superseded the album that you had in that year of listening? Let me know all about that, as well as the albums that you loved from this list, the tracks that really stood out for you, which were the albums that were most surprising, which ones were the ones that you're like, oh yeah, I remember them talking about that. Let me know all about that by commenting down below. If you haven't already and you've enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to my little channel here. Please consider to be a member as well. You get early access to this video. I recorded this a long time ago, so it's only coming out now. Yeah, please consider subscribing. It really does help a lot. And if you are a member of mine, you get early access to all my videos. And I think that is where I'm going to leave it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. This was a really fun one. This was one that I've been sitting on for a while, and I'm glad I got my buns in gear and actually sat down and talked about it. So Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.